go.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Writer Mother Monster. I'm your host, Laura Ehrlich, and our guest tonight is Sheba Karim. Before I introduce Sheba, if you enjoy Writer Mother Monster, please consider becoming a patron or patroness to help me keep the podcast going. You can find the link to become a patron or patroness on writermothermonster.com. Now, Sheba Karim is the author of the YA novels Skunk Girl, That Thing We Call a Heart, which made several best book lists, including Bank Street and Kirkus, and Mariam Sharma Hits the Road, which was named an NPR Best Book of the Year, and The Marvelous Mirza Girls, already out, May 2021. Her fiction and essays have been featured in 580 Split, Asia Literary Review, Femina, India Today, Literary Hub, Off Assignment, Shenandoah, South Asian Review, The Rumpus, Time Out Delhi, and in several anthologies in the United States and India. She has an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and is a writer in residence at Vanderbilt University. Sheba has 2 kids, ages 4 and 7, and describes writer motherhood in 3 words as submission, isolation, wonder. Now, please join me in welcoming Sheba Karim.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
I'm digging that intro music.
Yes,
it's
very powerful. It's a lady ballad. So I'm so excited to talk to you. Before we dive into your great body of work and motherhood, let's talk about those 3 words that you used to describe writer motherhood. And those, again, were submission, isolation, and wonder.
Yeah. So submission is inspired by, it's used a lot in Islam to mean like submitting to the will of Allah. And I use it in a slightly different sense here. And I think a lot of people related to this during the pandemic or can relate to this, even those without children, in that I think so much of motherhood is ultimately having to submit to the fact that you have so little control. Not only control over things like your time or how the evening might go or how the Saturday afternoon might go, but also how little control you actually have over who your kid is going to be and what their experiences are going to be and what they're going to be good at and what they're going to enjoy and what they're not going to enjoy. And I think as someone who's a big planner, the pandemic was a big kick in the butt. But, just like with the pandemic, it's like, oh, you can make all your plans. And I think it's the same thing with children. You can, even with having, what part of the reason I decided to have a second, because we debated it for a while, was the idea of having a sibling. And then I'm like, oh, I don't even have control over that relationship. Like they could end up like hating each, and I think that's really hard. I think to admit how little control you have is kind of terrifying as a mother. But I do think the pandemic helped me embrace it more fully, right? Because it was such a stark, like, oh my God, you have so little control. So submission, and so I'm getting better. I still have these moments where I try to pretend, right? But and then isolation is just we were just talking about this before, but how you feel isolated as a mother, especially in the beginning when you're up at all hours and you have small children or like small babies, and then they grow older and you kind of reemerge. And then with the pandemic, we were all hunkering down. And then as the world began to open, because our kids weren't vaccinated, we really were still in that phase of like very little travel, not going indoors, not really socializing unless it was like small groups outside. And I have the good fortune of having most of my best friends have no children, and so they were all like, and they most of them live in New York or other cities, and not in Nashville where I live. And before I would visit them or they would visit me. And so that wasn't happening. And then, my best friends in other places were starting to get together and travel together. My friends here who didn't have kids, and so it has been very lonely in that way. And a weird kind of lonely because not lonely so much in the sense like I am always with my kids and my partner, right? So, but just lonely in the other aspects that make you feel like you're part of the world and engaged, socially and spending time with your friends have been so difficult for parents of young kids, and hopefully that changes soon because it's been a long time. And then compounded with if you're a writer and a mother, your work anyway is a lonely work. So yeah, there's been a lot of isolation and wonder. I mean, that is just children, right? I mean, part of that having no control, at least the upside of that is sometimes amazing things happen and they do and say amazing things or show you the world in a certain way or just make you laugh. And so you do get to have these moments of just incredible wonder that really help pull you through because goddamn, without that, it would be tough going. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. Through the isolation and the submission, at least there are
yeah.
glimmers of wonder. Right?
Yes, right.
Um,
Totally.
yeah, and we were talking, as you said, we were talking a bit before the interview about the isolation and the sort of pandemic times of raising small children as a writer mother. I wonder, what did that do to your writing? And I can share like my own writing. I definitely felt like I burrowed into myself a little bit and got very sort of nostalgic and in my head. And I don't know if it's for the best yet because the project I'm working on, we'll have to just wait and see what happens there. But like, how did you feel as you were trying to write and to mother in isolation without the sort of stimulus of society?
Yeah. So it was March 2020, right, when the pandemic hit us, and I was doing sort of the last rounds of edits for my book, which is kind of great because it was something I was already familiar with, and so I could do, it required mental exertion, but it was like a book I'd known so well. I've been with this book for years, and it also gave me something to do, right? It gave me deadlines, and so I think by the end of that summer, um, I was done with edits. And then for me, it was really, really hard. Well, so then we pivoted to online. So all of last year, I teach at Vanderbilt. We were online, and so we had to learn how to teach on Zoom. So a lot of I didn't get much writing done because I was like focusing on, okay, how do I teach online? What is this new online world like? Which is also it was hard because if I go more than like 2 weeks without writing, I start to like feel unmoored, right? Like a lot of writers. But I also found when I was thinking about like, what do I want to write next? It was, several things happened. One thing is that India wasn't hit very hard by the pandemic. And my book came out in May of 2021. So March 2020 to May 21, there was like, it was pandemic, it was teaching online, it was gearing up for the book to come out. So doing all the, author promotion stuff, right? And then like 2 months or so before my book came out, the Delta variant hit Delhi and like brutally, like I'm sure, you've heard about it. And so I'd be talking to my friends in Delhi, and it was almost like they were like, it feels like it's in the air. Like if you step outside, you're gonna get it. And like people are dying on the street. And my friend was like, all you hear all day is ambulances. And it was so strange because here is my book coming out that's set in Delhi. And Delhi is undergoing this catastrophic, like that nobody could have. So we already knew there was a pandemic. We've been living in this pandemic, and then again something happens that no one could have predicted, right? Like if you had told someone in Delhi in January 2021, in 3 months, like people will just be like literally dying on the streets for lack of audit, they would be like, "What are you talking about?" And and I kept thinking, God, what am I going to write when I don't even know what's going to happen next month? Like what, I don't know where the world is going. I don't know where we might be tomorrow or in 1 month. And in some ways, I felt like my book felt like historical fiction to me, the one that was set in Delhi, because I'm like, that Delhi does not exist right now. I don't know what the Delhi that comes out of this Delta, wave is. What is going to be a different Delhi like? And so applying that to like what I was writing, I'm like, if I set it in a sort of a contemporary world, it's all going to be pre-pandemic. I wasn't writing stuff set in the pandemic, and already that felt like historical fiction to me, and so that I just, it was a strange place for me to be in. And so I worked on a short story that was set a few years ago, and that's kind of, and I've written a short screenplay, and so very short things. And I think in the spring, my hope is to really be able to sit down and, because I have some ideas that I've been thinking about, and because of teaching and stuff, the semester's been crazy. We are back in person now, and I think it's nice to be back in person. It's nice to have those moments. But you'd be walking to class and you run into someone you haven't seen in a few weeks. You know what I mean? Like someone for your department you haven't seen, and you're like, hey, remember those random social encounters we used to have? So it's been nice to kind of return. But it feels very exhausting, right, in a way that it didn't before. And so I'm looking forward to the end of the semester, and I think I'm ready now to really sit down and write and think in a way that I feel like I haven't been able to, since the pandemic started.
Yeah. Oh, I hear that. Yeah, and the whole returning to society thing and learning how to engage with three-dimensional people.
Yeah.
Really weird.
It's been I went to a Halloween party. I hadn't been to a Halloween party in a long time. I mean, maybe only 4 years, but everything feels like such a long time ago. And there's only like 10 people, and it was like an outside space. But I didn't know most of the people. I only knew like 2 out of the 10 people there, and I realized I haven't been in a situation like that in so long. It was crazy. And then on top of that, everyone was in costume, right? So it was just like these layers of like surreality, which would have been totally normal, like 3 years ago.
Yes.
So yeah, it's been nice. Yeah, it's very intense.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but like I don't know how to get out of in-person conversations. I mean, over Zoom, you can just say, okay, see ya, and everybody waves, and then you click leave, and like they disappear. But how do you exit a conversation with a person?
Yeah. Well, one nice thing about having kids is you can always use them as an excuse. Like, the sitter is coming or leaving, or, or whatever.
Yes. Using your kids as an excuse. Definitely. Yeah. So let's talk more about kids. And I'm really interested in talking more about the lack of control when you have kids, or the loss of control when you have kids, because I'm also, as you indicated, a type A person who likes to be very in control. And I feel like maybe a lot of writers are, because we're drawn to our internal worlds where we don't have to answer to other people, and we can just toil in isolation and have control over our own body of work. But what happens with motherhood, you totally lose control over your own life and like their lives, and it's a change of lifestyle for sure. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think it starts obviously with pregnancy, and then your body is changing, right, in these ways that you have no control over, right? And then you have this living thing inside you. And then I think, when it's still, I think there is a sense though, like when your baby's like in utero, that you are nourishing it, right? It exists inside you and because of you. And so even though your body is changing, it's your body, you know. And then the baby emerges, and actually from the very beginning, for something like breastfeeding, I remember, and I knew very little about caring for. I'm the youngest. I didn't grow up around babies, so I had no idea. Right? So we took like the classes, and I got to read the books, take the classes. I remember we took some like 2-hour breastfeeding class, and they just made it sound so easy. They're like, the baby will naturally want to come to your nipple and la la la, and it'll be like wonderful. And so my first had a tongue tie. And so those first 6 weeks were just miserable because she couldn't latch, and there were like lactation consultants, and I was pumping, and it was not, and I had envisioned that like Madonna and Child, like, experience, and it wasn't like that at all. And my second one also had a tongue tie, and at some point, and and the other thing that you learn very quickly about motherhood is the judgment that comes with it, right? And the feelings of guilt. So that was like an early lesson in how you're going to imagine things being one way, and they may very well go another. And then as they start to grow up and start talking, and even I think so I'm an academic, and my husband is an academic, and I'm a writer, and my daughter is very resistant to reading. and it was so hard for me, like, because I had never in my wildest dreams, I just imagined that she would love books, and she would just be, as soon as she started to read simple words, she'd just be like sitting in the corner, like reading. And I was like, oh God, that might not be who she is. And I have to be okay with that. And then there might be a lot of things that she likes or does or doesn't like. There may be just certain ways she is in the world that I don't expect and maybe would not be my choice. And I have to embrace that. And then sending them, especially when she went to kindergarten, she goes to public school. She's in second grade now, but like, I remember that first day of like her walking in the doors, and, she was in like a private, Vanderbilt has like a daycare, which I felt like is still outside your control, but I don't know. It seemed much more, public school seemed just really like, oh my God, she's really like entering this world in which I don't have any control. And all the thoughts of like how kids made fun of me when I was her age. And I was like, oh, that, those things could happen to her. There's so little I can do about it. It's really, and then if you want to go more like meta, the climate change, I remember we went to make I think I was pregnant with my second. We're like, oh, we don't have a will, and so we went and made a will, which was a very, I don't know if you've done this, but it's also terrifying because you're talking about your own demise. And I remember sitting with the attorney, and he was like, I forget the name. There's a name for this clause, because usually you're like, okay, if your partner if you die, then your partner gets like whatever, and then if both of you die, God forbid, then your kids get, and you appoint a guardian. But there's some name for this clause, but the lawyer is like, okay, we should put in the block X clause, which is, what if all of you die? The same. So like if you're all in a plane crash or whatever, how do you want to disperse your whatever your inheritance is then, or your and so that was like an interesting moment to think about. And he's like, yeah, I've been practicing for 30 years, and I have seen it happen once.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, I know. And then there was, but when we were like having, he talks to you, he was talking to us about what are the needs of your children in college, and blah blah blah. And it was I remember thinking, we're talking in this way as if we're so certain that by the time my kids are like ready for college, money will be a thing, college will still exist, I was just reading somewhere on the internet, like which cities have a good chance of being underwater by 2030. And like Bangkok is screwed. Most of Bangladesh is screwed. And I'm like, those kind of, that 2030 is not very far away. And I think most mothers, if we think about it too much, it makes us crazy, right? Because we've brought children into this world. And I think it's terrifying to think we brought them into this world and there might not be a world left, or it might be a world with very limited resources, or people, I don't even know. So no control over that. Like we imagine this future for them as kind of similar to our trajectory. You get older, you go to college, you find your passions, you hopefully find someone kind to love, you have your own kids, and that might not be the case for them. And anyway, so that's like the grander, like the grander, darker, like that's, but I feel like it kind of hovers as a shadow, like back there,
That's the existential loss of
Yes.
control. Yes.
So there's many levels to this loss of control.
Right. Absolutely. How does that, if at all, play into your writing? This newly found loss of control.
Yeah. It was, who was it? I was just reading and a writer gave a talk, which I'm blanking on her name, but she was talking about how it was shocking to her that fiction, up until recently, fiction writers rarely dealt with climate change. And if you read most contemporary fiction writing, you just think the world was like chugging along, like environmentally it was fine or whatever. And I was like, actually, I've never really talked about that in my writing. But I think, how does loss of control? So I'm interested. One of the next projects I'm interested in working on is maybe less loss of control. I guess, yeah, actually, it is related to that, because I think with the sandwich generation, right, where you have these children that you have very little control over a lot of aspects of their lives, and then you have also parents who are aging. And you have very little control over how they're going to age, and but you also have this responsibility, right, for both your children and your parents, without having much control over either. And I think so that's something I've been thinking about, and that's something I do want to explore in my work, because that's where I am right now.
Yeah.
My parents are getting older. My children are young and need me, but also have their, everyone has their own demands, and it's stressful. It's stressful, and then it's like, where do I fit in? Where do my needs fit into this picture? And how do I carve out time and space for myself and my marriage and my friends, while also, taking care of my children, and also like worrying about my parents, and trying to figure out, like, at some point they're not going to be able to live on their own anymore. And so yeah, I want to write more about just people in their 40s. And because I focused, my first 4 novels were YA novels, and my last novel, it's loosely inspired by the show Gilmore Girls. And so the mother is a very important character in the novel, and she goes through her own kind of adventures in the novel, when they moved to Delhi together, her and her daughter. So I feel like I'm at a point in my life where I've enjoyed writing about teenage angst, but I also want to write some stuff about like 40-something-year-old angst.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that resonates with a lot of listeners. It definitely does with me. And I want to talk about India in a second. But first, 40-year-old writers. Yeah, I just turned 40 this last year.
Welcome. Welcome
yeah,
to the
thanks.
section.
And I feel like I didn't anticipate I didn't anticipate my response to it, because turning 30 didn't really, it was like a blip. But turning 40 sent me on a bit of a tailspin, and my daughter went to kindergarten at the same time, and something about like that, entering that decade, and my parents, like you said, being older and my daughter growing up, it all created this sort of like restlessness and anxiety that I didn't anticipate. And I would love to read more about that, about women in this like period of life. So that sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's talk about India for a second. I know that's something you wanted to talk about, the difference
Yeah.
between
Oh
raising a
my gosh.
child in India and the
Yeah.
US.
So I've spent quite a few years of the past 10 years living in India. And my first 2 years I lived there, I did not have children. And then in 2018, I was working on this Marvelous Mirza Girls, which is set in Delhi. And so it was lovely. We got to be there all year, and I got to work on my book set in Delhi, which was ideal. But it was the first time that I was like, wait, we had to stay there for 6 months. So my daughter was a baby. My eldest daughter was very, very young. So now she was 3 when we were moving there. And it's such a different concept of parenthood. So basically anyone, if you're middle class or above in Delhi, you have a nanny, you have like a maid who also cooks, or maybe you'll have a separate cook. You'll often have a driver. Like you have like a whole staff, which is inconceivable, right, to middle class parents here. And so that allows you a lot of time and a lot of freedom. Which you can't have in the US unless you're like maybe, the 1% or whatever. And so it how in this country, when you're pregnant with your first kid and everyone is like, oh, your life is going to change forever. And it's like you feel like something is ending. Like you have this feeling that something is definitely ending. Like this phase of your life is over. Life as you know it is over, right? That's basically the message that you get. And in Delhi, it's not, because you have this whole support network. And I'm talking about middle class and above people. So not there's a certain amount of privilege that but even a lower middle class family will have at least one person who comes and cleans every day, or so because you have this whole support network, and you have like this full-time nanny. Some people have nannies who live with them, so parents are out all the time, right? Like socializing I remember this is before I had kids and I was in Delhi, and it was Thursday night. I was at some party at a bar. It was like 12:30, so it's past midnight. Okay, I'm like talking to this woman, and at some point she's like, "Yeah, I have 3 children." And I was like, "Oh, how old are they?" She's like, "Oh, 8, 5, and 3." And I'm like, in the States, you would not, Thursday night at that time, you would never like run, but because she gets to go home, and in the morning the nanny will like get the kids up and ready for school, and she can sleep in, and like someone will be cooking breakfast. And so and it allows for this kind of spontaneity, because either your nanny lives with you, or your nanny's often willing to stay late because that she'd like to make overtime. So at 4:30 p.m. you can be like, "Oh, can you stay late so I can meet and usually they'll be able to, and then you can make a last minute plan, as opposed to like planning things 3 weeks in advance or whatever. So so the flip side of that is, so when we moved to Delhi, we're trying to find a school for my 3-year-old, and most of the, a private school, because the public schools are not, anyone who has any money will try to send their kid to private school. The public system is not very good. So all the programs for kids her age end at noon. Okay, so like 8:30 to noon, because there's a presumption that there are people at home to take care of the kids. And even if the mother, or if both parents work, there'll still be like a bunch of people at home. And I was working on my book, and I was working from home, and I'm like, if my daughter comes home at noon, there goes my work day, because she's not going to let me eat. So finally, anyway, so we ended up finding one of the few like full day programs that had like aftercare, but they had opened a Waldorf school in Delhi, and so we decided to go check it out. And so they had like a parent introduction session. So we go and we show up late, and they had like everyone's sitting, and the parents are all sitting in like in a circle on the floor, and there's like these 2 Waldorf teachers like leading. When we showed up, the parents were like sharing childhood experiences, and then the Waldorf teacher started basically giving the parents a lecture. And so the first part of the lecture was, you know, we see what happens to the children when their nanny comes to pick them up. You know, they're not very happy. But if the parent happens to come pick them up, then there's the smile on their face lights up, you know. And in my head, I'm like, your school ends at 3 p.m. So, you know, if both parents work, right, that's like
Yeah.
not a possibility. So there was like this guilt about you should pick your kids up, even though you're school. So I'm like, maybe you should make if that's important to you, why don't you extend your hours? I didn't say that, but and then they went on this, the second half of the lecture was about how you need to spend time with more time, quality time with your children. And also you should be helping them get ready in the morning. And you should be putting them to bed every night if you can, or most nights a week. And, you know, and it was just, I'm like, you gather a bunch of like middle class American parents in a room and like, they would be like, God, just give me a night off from putting them. And so, you know, so India parenting, because a lot of these parents, you don't have to clean, you don't have to do laundry, you don't have to put your kids to bed every night, you don't have to get them ready. You know, you can you can choose which of those things you want to do. That sort of the exhaustion of repetition that we experience, right? Of like the constant routines, like every night, da, 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 da. And that doesn't exist in Delhi, you know, in India. For a lot of parents. And so it's just very, and which is wonderful in some ways. But then I will also add that the reason that this is possible is because labor is so cheap, and because there's like this class caste hierarchy that exists. So I don't, it's like, because I've thought about this, like the, you know, American parent versus Indian parent. I'm like, we need the village here. We need the support system. Parents need a break, right? And we have enough, we have zero here, right? You can get a babysitter like once in a while, um, but then in India, like it's like an exploitative like system, right? And so even so children in India who grow up with like these nannies and these maids, it's very interesting because from a very young age, probably even before they can talk, I bet, because kids are very perceptive, they understand that there's a hierarchy and that they are actually higher in this hierarchy than the adult people who are taking care of them,
Mm.
you know. And so I think, you know, there are great things about being a parent in India and like not so great thing, and the same thing in America. And I'm like, God, where is the balance, right? Like where, maybe Germany, where there's a lot of state support for parents and they get stipends and they get lots of childcare, and you know, so maybe Berlin is the answer. I don't know.
If you find a place, let me know and I will
Yeah.
move there with you. Yeah. So tell me about you're bringing your family back to the US in that transition.
So, you know, so it's interesting because my daughter, my eldest was 3 when we moved to India, and then she was 4 when we came back. And she was very happy to come back because she liked the nuclear family. She liked having, and my husband's an anthropologist, so he was busy doing a lot of research and ethnographic interviews. So she saw him, but she didn't see him as much as she would have if we were here. And, you know, she saw me, but I will admit, I took advantage of having the support staff to like, Wednesday night, okay, I'll meet you for, you know,
Sure,
because I'm like,
yeah.
I knew it was like, I'm only here for a year and then it's back to like the American, you know, drudgery of parenting. So, so she was thrilled. She's like, oh, we're back. Mom and dad are all mine all day, every day or whatever. My youngest was 3 months when we moved there, and we were there for a year. And so she was this baby. And so she grew up surrounded by people. So there's a nanny, and we had a woman who came for a few hours a day to cook and clean. And then there was a driver, and then there was a downstairs landlady, and she had all her people and her, you know, so she would go downstairs at least once or twice a day and have fun with those people. And so she was always, and in India, people are always coming and going. Like someone will be in the neighborhood and they'll stop off for chai. And like, it just, you know, it's just there's constant social activity. And that's how she grew up from like age 3 months to like a year plus. And so she had a really hard time coming back here because it felt so lonely to her, because we were just the four of us in this house, and she was just like, where is everybody? And like, she, the doorbell rings, it's like the Amazon person, it's not somebody coming to stopping by to have tea and hang out, right? And so it took her, it took her a while, it took her a few months before she really adjusted. So
I can imagine. And how did you adjust from having the support where I'm sure it was you had the time to write and to get deep into your work, to the transition back to America where now you have repetitive laundry?
yeah. Yeah, it was hard. It was hard. And I think I was kind of bracing myself for it. I'm like, okay, this is kind of a la la land. You're in for a year and then it's back to but it was a rough transition for all of us. Yeah, for sure. And then, I started teaching right when we came back. So there was a lot going on, but I do feel like transitions are difficult, but then you get into the group. Like, it's like, for example, I barely cooked in India, because I had this woman who made wonderful Indian food, like better, so I'm like, why? And you think, oh God, I'm gonna go back to America, and I don't mind cooking, but it's not my passion. I'm like, oh, we're gonna have to cook, right? Like, we usually take turns, but then you get back into the groove of it. You're like, okay, I'm cooking again, I'm cleaning again, I'm whatever again, and so yeah, you do what you have to do. That's also motherhood.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that. So I've said this in multiple conversations now that I feel like I stop asking people how they find balance because there is no balance.
Oh God.
So let's just talk about logistics then of like when you get your work done. When do you write?
Yeah. So this semester I've done very little writing. I think I'm teaching 2 classes, and being back in person is, like I said, it's been exhausting. And I feel like because we're back in person, people are very eager to have meetings. So, like work meetings, and really my time to write is like 9 to 4, right, when the kids are in school. And so I'm teaching Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So sometimes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, depending on like meetings, and I'll squeeze some writing time in. But on the semesters, I teach one class. And like a really good semester will be at my one class, which is usually a fiction workshop, meets once a week for 3 hours. And then on those days I'm not teaching, I will carve out like, I try to do 4 hours. That would be a good day of writing time. During the time. And it's so fun. I don't know if you've had this experience, Laura, but sometimes when I'm on panels, just by listening to what people are saying, I can tell who has kids and who doesn't. Has that happened to you? I'm like, that person does not have children. Oh, that person, no kids. Like,
yeah.
So yeah, because when do you find time to write? I'm like, I write when my kids are in school. That's all. And for me, I can't, when it's not, by the time it's 9 p.m., I am knackered, like I'm done. And so I'm not one of those people who can stay up late. I'm also not one of those people who can get up at dawn. And I know there's a lot of mothers and parents who do that, right, for an hour before the kids wake up, but I'm tired, like I can't get up. So yeah,
I know. I used to get before my daughter was born, I used to get up like before work started, and I would have like hour or two in the morning, and I miss that, but I can't do it anymore for just the reason you said. Like, I wonder if you're still in the stage with very small kids or younger kids where sleep is not a certainty. So it's kind of like, like I can't plan to get up because who knows if I'll be up in the night for 3 hours with someone who had a nightmare. So like I will get my sleep when I can.
Yeah.
No.
So that's another thing, right? You can't even control if you're going to have a good night's sleep.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah. And sleep is so important, I think, to productivity and creativity. Like I find if I don't get a good night's sleep, I'm just like, ugh.
I
might write something, but it's probably not that.
And I don't know. I know there are some, I have heard some mother writers talk about how they had very young children and they would write while the baby napped. I don't know if you know, and I just was so tired, with when both my kids were babies, that I was never able to write those first 6 months. Definitely the first three, forget it. And then maybe I would do an hour or two, but it took me a while to feel like I had the energy to like actually write, And so I forget who it was. I feel like I don't know if it's Tony Moore. It's some famous writer who was like, yes, my kid will just be sleeping on me and I would write. And I admire that. I think that's awesome, but it was never the case for me.
No, I don't know how people can write with a child on them. Like I don't know, like just at the angles, and like I would drop all my stuff all over her when she was sleeping.
I guess if they're in like a sling, you could kind of, I don't know. I never did it, so
no. And I had grand plans when I was pregnant too. I was like, I will finish this book I'm working on like while I'm pregnant, and then when she's born, I will edit it and like revise it. And when you're pregnant too, you're tired and like, and your brain's not fully functioning, and so I feel like we're fed lies about like what we can accomplish as new mothers.
No, that is true. I don't think anyone quite prepares you for how difficult it is. I think people say, oh, it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. And I will say, have you seen the show Better Things?
No.
It's a show, I think it's on Hulu, and it's Pamela Adlon, who's this comedian, and she's in real life, she's a mom, a single mom of 3 girls, and in the show she plays this, woman who's a single mom of 3 girls, and they're older, but it's one of the few, I feel like when you watch shows, when you see motherhood depicted on like TV shows, it's just like such bull to me, like it just and it's one of the few shows where I thought, oh, this feels real to me, like this depiction of motherhood. So yeah, I highly recommend it to all the moms I meet.
Okay.
Or anyone actually. Yeah.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah, because it's funny, even when we were talking about Gilmore Girls, I remember watching that show when I was in whatever it was, late high school or early college.
That's Connecticut.
Yeah. And I so identified with the daughter, with Rory, who was like a little younger than me. And now when I watch Gilmore Girls, I identify with the mom. And it's that weird shift in like culture. And I was talking to my husband, this is again a digression, but it's kind of fun. I was talking to my husband the other day about this and like watching Buffy. And like when he watched it in high school, he thought Buffy was really hot, and now he watches it, it's like the teacher, like her teacher is really hot.
Oh, how we've aged. Yes.
Like that turning 40 thing. But so Sheba, I know you actually have a commitment in about 5 minutes, speaking of writer motherhood, but for the next couple of minutes that I have you, I'll just close by asking you if you could give a message to any writer mom who's listening, maybe like an early, like a mom in the throes of the first couple months. What message would you give?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. I would definitely say that, and I guess everyone is different, but for me, I think it's very easy to lose your identity after you have a kid, because suddenly society sees you as a mother and has certain expectations of you as a mother. And also because motherhood can be very consuming. And also because you have so little time, right, for yourself. And again, I'd say the first 3 months, forget it. Like it's just maybe the first 6 months. But as your baby starts to sleep more and you feel like you have more energy, I think it's important to try to keep doing at least 1 or 2 of the things that you did before you had kids. And even if that's just like meeting up with your girlfriend for coffee once a week, or I don't know, playing ping pong, whatever it is, because I think we sacrifice a lot as mothers, and I think a lot of some of the things that are first to go are things that we think aren't important. I don't have time to have coffee with my friend, or who cares about ping pong, but those things matter. They matter a lot. And so I would think about those one or two things. That's obviously, you're already a writer and you're going to be a mother. So besides writing, besides mother, that sustain you and that make you happy and that give you joy, and hold on to those things for the rest of your life. Like, don't let those go. Yeah.
I love that for so many reasons. First of all, that you said find things other than writing and other than motherhood, like, because those are like staples, right? And then what are the other things that drive you? And I also love that you said ping pong.
That's because we just got a ping pong table in our house. We had this front room, and we could put a couch and whatever in it. And I was just like, why don't we just get a small ping pong table? I was like, yeah. And it's like, it's crazy because normally you enter a house and you expect to see, like, I don't know, like furniture, and you open the door of my house and there's just this, like, there's a coat rack and a ping pong table. It's like my foyer or whatever, right? But it's really fun. So.
That is fabulous. I think, yeah, find your own version of ping pong, everyone. Exactly. Like, whatever.
Find your ping pong and hold on to it.
I think that's the perfect place to end. Yeah. And thank you so much for joining us, Sheba. It's been a pleasure. Absolutely. Stick around for a second, so I'll say goodbye. But thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I do. I hope you find your own version of ping pong. And if you enjoyed the episode and Writer Mother Monster in general, I hope you'll consider becoming a patron or patroness to help me keep the podcast going. You can find the link to the Patreon page on writermothermonster.com. Thank you all, and I'll see you next week.